Jonathan Roumie stepped into the first-class cabin of a flight at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, and the atmosphere subtly shifted. A flight attendant, her eyes sharp with judgment, demanded he conceal the silver crucifix around his neck, claiming it might disturb other passengers. But she didn't know this unassuming man, dressed in a black t-shirt and worn sneakers, was the star of The Chosen. What began as a quiet act of prejudice over a symbol of faith would soon become a moment that shook the entire flight. By the time the plane landed, no one would forget what he said or how he said it. But before the flight took off, a shadow of bias had already crept in, threatening to snuff out the light of truth. 3 days earlier, Jonathan was in his modest Chicago apartment, immersed in his morning prayers. The room told a story: bare walls adorned only with a wooden crucifix carved by his Lebanese grandmother. A faded photo of his father, who died believing his son would never succeed, and stacks of theology books, their pages worn from years of study. His kitchen table overflowed with letters from the chosen viewers thanking him for portraying a Jesus that felt real in a world full of spiritual fakes. Jonathan had no interest in fame, turning down every chance to profit from his sacred role. But that day, an unexpected work trip brought him to O'Hare. O'Hare International Airport buzzed with its usual chaos. Travelers dragged suitcases, children scampered about, and business people tapped furiously on laptops. Amid the crowd, Jonathan walked at a steady pace, unhurried. He wore a plain black t-shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers. No flashy watch, no entourage, nothing but a small silver crucifix glinting around his neck, its edges worn as if it had weathered decades of stories. A few passers-by glanced at him, curiosity flickering. Is that him? But most didn't recognize him. He looked like an ordinary traveler, perhaps out of place in the airport's polished sheen. At the first-class gate, Jonathan stepped into the priority line and handed his ticket to the attendant. The woman, her name tag reading Sarah Mitchell, stood rigid in a Navy uniform, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. She glanced at the ticket, then at him, her brow furrowing with suspicion. "Sir," she said, her voice clipped, "I think you are at the wrong gate. This is for first class." Jonathan offered a calm smile, unfazed. "I'm at the right gate," he replied, his tone even. Sarah checked the ticket again, spotting his name, Jonathan Roumie, and frowned. She knew who he was, but his simplicity, devoid of celebrity swagger, threw her off. Must be a comped ticket, she thought, her gaze lingering on the crucifix with a flash of unease. "Mr. Roumie, is it?" she asked, pronouncing his surname with a hint of disdain as if it carried a stain. "The ticket's valid, but I need to verify further. Not everyone belongs in this cabin." The words dripped with prejudice, targeting his appearance and Lebanese heritage. Jonathan remained composed, handing over his ID. Sarah scanned it, her face tightening as everything checked out. She let him pass, but her eyes followed the crucifix as if it were a provocation. "Don't cause trouble on this flight," she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. Jonathan didn't respond, only nodded and walked down the jetway. He settled into seat 2A, the first-class cabin, plush with leather seats and soft lighting. Jonathan fastened his seatbelt, the crucifix glinting against his black t-shirt. He didn't read or watch a movie, just sat quietly, his breathing steady, almost meditative. But his stillness drew eyes. Sarah from the galley watched him through a gap in the curtain. She felt an inexplicable discomfort, unable to pinpoint why. Perhaps it was his simplicity amid the cabin's opulence. Perhaps it was the crucifix, small yet heavy with presence, unsettling her in a way she couldn't name. She'd served loud, entitled celebrities before, but Jonathan was different too, plain too real, and it unnerved her. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing her uniform, and decided to act. She stepped out, her walk stiff, practiced from countless training drills. Standing before Jonathan's seat, she leaned down, her voice low but sharp. "Sir," she said, "I need to remind you of our policy. Overt religious symbols like that thing you're wearing can make other passengers uncomfortable. Please tuck it away." Jonathan looked up, his eyes calm but direct. "Is there a rule I've broken?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sarah stiffened, caught off guard by his composure. "It's not about rules," she replied, her tone tightening. "It's about maintaining a neutral environment. Some might find it offensive." Jonathan glanced at the crucifix, then back at her. I've flown hundreds of times with this, he said. No one's ever complained. If it's an issue, is it because I don't look like I belong in this cabin? The question cut like a blade, piercing her bias about his appearance and Lebanese roots. Sarah flushed but clung to her professional tone. This isn't personal, she said, gesturing vaguely at the crucifix. It's policy. Please comply or I'll have to inform the captain. Jonathan didn't flare with anger, but he didn't yield either. This crucifix isn't jewelry, he said, his voice low but firm. It's my faith, the thing that held me through dark days. I won't hide it. Sarah straightened, her eyes flashing with a mix of confusion and irritation. A nearby passenger looked up curious. Another whispered to their companion. The first-class cabin's atmosphere began to shift like a storm gathering. Sarah stepped back, her voice taut. I'll give you time to reconsider, she said. But her eyes promised the fight wasn't over. Jonathan met her gaze not with defiance, but with quiet strength. He knew this wasn't just about the crucifix. It was about what she saw in him, a Lebanese man, a Christian, someone who didn't fit her vision of first-class glamour. The confrontation had begun, and the cabin's soft lights were only the start of a greater story. The first-class cabin of the flight departing Chicago's O'Hare International Airport hummed with quiet luxury, but an undercurrent of tension simmered beneath the polished surface. Jonathan Roumie sat in seat 2A, his silver crucifix resting openly against his black t-shirt, his demeanor calm yet unyielding. Across the aisle, passengers sipped champagne, but their eyes darted toward him, sensing the brewing conflict. Sarah Mitchell, the flight attendant with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, stood in the galley, her navy uniform crisp, but her composure fraying. Her attempt to shame Jonathan into hiding his crucifix, rooted in her bias against his Christian faith and Lebanese heritage, had failed, and now her irritation was morphing into determination. She was ready to escalate, convinced she could control the narrative. But Jonathan's quiet strength was about to turn her plan against her, setting the stage for a confrontation that would ripple through the cabin and beyond. Sarah smoothed her uniform, her fingers lingering on her name tag as she steadied herself. She dealt with difficult passengers before demanding celebrities and titled executives, but Jonathan was different. His simplicity, his refusal to conform to her expectations of first-class glamour, gnawed at her. The crucifix, small and worn, felt like a challenge to her authority, a symbol of something she couldn't quantify or control. Worse, his question, "Is it because I don't look like I belong?" had pierced her facade, exposing the prejudice she'd tried to cloak in policy. She muttered to herself, "He's just an actor playing holy. I'll make him comply." Her plan was clear: double down, frame him as disruptive, and reclaim her domain. Jonathan, meanwhile, sat still, his hands resting on his jeans, his gaze distant but serene. The crucifix glinted under the cabin lights, its edges softened by years of wear, a silent testament to battles survived. He wasn't unaware of the eyes on him. A businessman 2 rows back lowered his tablet. A woman across the aisle adjusted her glasses to watch, but he wasn't performing. His calm was rooted in something deeper, a faith that had carried him through rejection, loss, and the slurs he'd faced for his Lebanese roots. He sensed Sarah's next move, but he was ready to speak truth, no matter the cost. Sarah emerged from the galley, her steps deliberate, her expression a mask of professional courtesy. She leaned toward Jonathan, her voice low, but edged with authority. "Mr. Roumie," she said, emphasizing his surname with a subtle sneer, "I've received comments from other passengers. They're feeling uneasy about your display." The lie was thinly veiled, her eyes flicking to the crucifix as if it were an offense. Jonathan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Uneasy about what exactly?" he asked, his voice steady. Sarah hesitated, caught off guard by his directness. "About overt ideological symbols in a confined space," she replied, her tone sharpening. "We aim to keep this cabin neutral." Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with clarity. "A symbol of faith makes people uncomfortable," he asked, his voice low but resonant. Sarah's jaw tightened, her bias laid bare. "Imagine if everyone wore religious pendants, political pins, or cultural markers," she said, her gaze lingering on his face, hinting at his Lebanese heritage. "It could create division in a space meant for unity. The words were rehearsed, but they landed like a jab, implying his identity itself was divisive. A nearby passenger, a man in a suit, removed an earbud, his brow furrowing. Another, a woman with a laptop, glanced up, sensing the shift in the air. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice calm but piercing. If someone wore a pendant of a tree, a star, or a stone, would you ask them to hide it? He asked. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it, her composure slipping. That's not the issue, she said, but her voice faltered. Then what is? Jonathan pressed his tone, gentle yet unrelenting. The cabin grew quieter, the clink of glasses fading as more passengers tuned in. Sarah straightened her face, flushing. I'm following protocol, she said, her voice rising slightly. If you refuse, I'll have to escalate this to the captain. Jonathan didn't flinch. Do what you need to, he said, his eyes meeting hers. But the problem isn't what's on my chest, it's what's in your eyes. The words landed like a thunderclap, soft but seismic. Sarah stepped back, her professional mask cracking, a flicker of frustration breaking through. The man with the earbud angled his phone, discreetly recording. The woman with the laptop whispered to her seatmate, "Is that the guy from The Chosen?" The cabin's atmosphere thickened, a silent divide forming not between faiths or cultures, but between truth and pretense. Sarah's authority was slipping, and she felt it. I'll give you one more chance to comply, she said, her voice taut. Or I'll notify security upon landing. Jonathan's expression remained steady, almost sorrowful. This crucifix has saved me through nights I thought I'd never survive, he said. I won't hide it, not for you, not for anyone. Sarah turned on her heel, her steps sharp as she retreated to the galley. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her tablet, typing a note to the captain. Passenger 2A refusing to comply with decorum. Request intervention. But her confidence was waning. She'd expected Jonathan to back down, to shrink under her scrutiny, but his quiet resolve had turned the tables. She glanced at Emily, a younger attendant with dark hair tied in a ponytail, who'd been watching from the galley. Back me up when the captain comes, Sarah snapped. Emily nodded, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty, as if she sensed Sarah's bias had crossed a line. In the cabin, Jonathan sat unmoved, the crucifix still visible, a beacon of his faith. He wasn't seeking a fight, but he wouldn't bow to prejudice. He'd faced it before, casting directors who'd called him two ethnic trolls, who'd mocked his Lebanese heritage colleagues, who'd sneered at his faith. Each time he'd chosen grace over anger, but grace didn't mean silence. The businessman now openly recorded, his phone angled carefully. The woman with the laptop typed furiously, perhaps drafting a tweet. The tension was palpable, like a storm cloud ready to break. Sarah's next move was critical. She knew the captain, Daniel Carter, was a by-the-book veteran, and she banked on his support to enforce protocol. But she hadn't counted on the passengers' growing attention or Jonathan's unyielding truth. She whispered to herself, "He's just a religious nut. I'll make sure he regrets this." Her bias, now fully exposed to herself, drove her forward, but it was also her undoing. As she prepared to summon the captain, Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, his lips moving in silent prayer. He knew the battle wasn't just with Sarah, it was with the fear and judgment she carried. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, but the crucible of truth was only beginning to heat up, and Jonathan was ready for what came next. The first-class cabin of the flight from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport was a pressure cooker, the air thick with unspoken tension. Jonathan Roumie sat in seat 2A, his silver crucifix glinting against his black t-shirt, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm brewing around him. Sarah Mitchell, the flight attendant, with blonde hair and a tight bun, stood in the galley, her Navy uniform pristine, but her composure unraveling. Her attempt to force Jonathan to hide his crucifix, fueled by her prejudice against his Christian faith and Lebanese heritage, had backfired, his quiet resolve exposing her bias to the cabin. Now determined to regain control, she was ready to escalate to the captain, but Jonathan's next words would shift the tide, igniting a spark of truth that would leave her prejudice teetering on the edge of collapse. Sarah gripped her tablet, her knuckles white, as she typed a final note to summon Captain Daniel Carter. Her plan was to frame Jonathan as a disruptive passenger leveraging protocol to justify her demand that he conceal his crucifix. But her confidence was shaken. His words, "The problem isn't what's on my chest, it's what's in your eyes," had cut deeper than she'd expected, stirring a flicker of doubt she quickly suppressed. She glanced at Emily, the younger attendant with dark hair and a ponytail, who stood nearby, her expression uneasy. "Stay sharp," Sarah hissed. "We need to show he's the problem, not us." Emily nodded, but her hesitation was palpable, as if she sensed Sarah's bias was crossing into malice. Jonathan, meanwhile, remained still, his hands resting on his faded jeans, the crucifix a quiet anchor against his chest. He felt the eyes of the cabin passengers, pretending to read or sip drinks, but clearly watching. The businessman 2 rows back continued recording discreetly, his phone angled toward Jonathan's seat. The woman with the laptop typed rapidly, her screen glowing with what looked like a social media post. Jonathan wasn't seeking their attention, but he knew the moment was bigger than himself. He'd faced prejudice before casting rejections for being two Middle Eastern slurs about his Lebanese roots, sneers at his faith, but each time his crucifix had reminded him to stand firm. Now it was more than a symbol, it was a shield against Sarah's judgment. Sarah emerged from the galley, her steps sharper, her voice laced with forced authority. "Mr. Roumie," she said, her tone loud enough to draw every eye, "I've notified the captain. Your refusal to comply with crew instructions is now a safety concern." The lie was bold, her eyes flicking to the crucifix as if it were a weapon. Jonathan turned to her, his expression calm but piercing. "A safety concern?" he asked, his voice low, yet resonant. "Because I won't hide my faith, or because I don't fit your idea of who belongs here?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to her bias about his heritage and appearance. The businessman's phone steadied, capturing every word. The woman with the laptop paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. Sarah's face flushed, her professional mask cracking. "This isn't about you personally," she snapped, but her voice betrayed her. "It's about maintaining a neutral environment. Your cultural display is divisive." The word cultural landed like a slur aimed at his Lebanese roots, and the cabin stirred. A man across the aisle set down his champagne glass, his brow furrowing. A woman 3 rows back whispered to her companion, "She's targeting him." Sarah sensed the shift, her authority slipping, but she doubled down. "If you don't conceal that necklace, security will meet us at landing," she said, her voice rising. "This is your final warning." Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers, not with anger, but with a clarity that silenced the cabin. "This crucifix isn't a display," he said, his voice steady but weighted with emotion. "It's a lifeline. It held me through nights I didn't think I'd survive, lost rejection moments when people like you told me I didn't belong because of my faith, my blood." He paused, his gaze softening but unyielding. "I've faced war zones in my heart hospitals where hope was thin, and this cross reminded me I'm still here. You want me to hide it? Then tell me why my faith threatens you more than anyone else's." The cabin fell silent, the hum of the engines the only sound. Sarah's jaw tightened, her eyes darting to the passengers now openly staring. The businessman's phone was no longer discreet, its lens trained on her. The woman with the laptop typed furiously, her screen flashing with hashtags like "Faith under fire." Emily, standing behind Sarah, shifted uncomfortably, her eyes dropping to the floor. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Jonathan's truth had stripped her pretense bare, exposing the prejudice she'd cloaked in policy. "I'm doing my job," she stammered, but the words sounded hollow, a lie even she couldn't believe. A voice broke the silence, Emily, soft but firm. "Sarah, maybe we should talk to the captain together," she said, her dark ponytail swaying as she stepped forward. "This doesn't feel right." Sarah shot her a glare, her control slipping further. "Stay out of this," she hissed, but Emily's words had shifted the dynamic. Passengers nodded subtly, their silent support for Jonathan growing. The man with the champagne glass spoke up, his voice calm but pointed. "I don't see a safety issue here," he said. "Let the man wear his necklace." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin, a tide turning against Sarah's crusade. Sarah's panic surged. She turned back to Jonathan, her voice sharp. "You're causing a disturbance," she said, grasping at straws. "This is now a crew matter." Jonathan shook his head, his expression almost sorrowful. "The disturbance isn't me," he said. "It's the fear you're carrying, fear of what's different, fear of what you can't control. This crucifix doesn't divide people. Your judgment does." The words landed like a gavel, and Sarah stepped back, her face pale. The businessman's phone captured her retreat. The woman's laptop glowed with a tweet, "Flight attendant shames passenger for crucifix. Is this fair? Check O'Hare incident." The cockpit door opened and Captain Daniel Carter emerged, a man with graying hair and a weathered face, his Navy uniform exuding quiet authority. He walked down the aisle, his steps measured his presence, calming the charged atmosphere. Sarah rushed to him, her voice low but urgent. "Captain, we have a passenger refusing to comply with decorum," she said, gesturing toward Jonathan. "His religious display is unsettling the cabin." Carter's eyes flicked to Jonathan, then back to Sarah, his expression unreadable. "What's your take, Emily?" he asked, turning to the younger attendant. Emily hesitated, then spoke softly. "He's been respectful, sir. He just won't hide his necklace." Carter nodded, then approached Jonathan's seat. "Mr. Roumie," Carter said, his voice steady. "I'm Captain Carter. I need to understand the situation to ensure everyone's well-being." "Can you share your side?" Jonathan looked up, his eyes clear, his voice calm but firm. "Your attendant asked me to hide this," he said, touching the crucifix lightly. "She said it might make others uncomfortable. I said no. This isn't about ideology, it's about survival, about the faith that kept me alive through darkness. I don't wear it to provoke. I wear it because it's who I am." The cabin was so quiet, the click of a seatbelt 3 rows away sounded loud. Carter listened, his face thoughtful, then turned to Sarah. "Has he been disrespectful?" he asked. Sarah faltered. "No," but Carter cut her off gently. Aggressive Emily shook her head. "No, sir." Carter exhaled, his gaze settling on the crucifix, then on Jonathan. The cabin held its breath, passengers leaning forward, phones still recording. Sarah's prejudice was crumbling under the weight of truth, and her next move would seal her fate. Jonathan sat steady, his faith a lighthouse in the storm, ready for whatever came next. But the real reckoning was just beginning as the truth prepared to shine brighter than Sarah's bias could ever dim. The first-class cabin of the flight from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport was a crucible of raw emotion, the air charged with the weight of truth unveiled. Jonathan Roumie sat in seat 2A, his silver crucifix resting openly against his black t-shirt, his calm presence a beacon amid the storm. Captain Daniel Carter, with graying hair and a weathered face in his Navy uniform, stood in the aisle, his thoughtful gaze shifting between Jonathan and Sarah Mitchell, the flight attendant, whose blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun. Sarah's prejudice, her demand that Jonathan hide his crucifix rooted in her bias against his Christian faith and Lebanese heritage, had been laid bare by his unyielding testimony. The passengers, now openly supportive, recorded the scene, their murmurs and nods a tide against her faltering authority. As Sarah's control crumbled, Jonathan's next words would not only deepen the cabin's transformation, but set the stage for her ultimate reckoning, a moment of grace that would leave no one untouched. Captain Carter's voice was steady, cutting through the tension. "Mr. Roumie, you've made your position clear," he said, his eyes lingering on the crucifix. "And you've been respectful. I see no violation here." He turned to Sarah, his tone firm but not unkind. "Ms. Mitchell, is there anything else I need to know?" Sarah's face paled, her Navy uniform suddenly seeming too tight, her hands clutching her tablet as if it could anchor her. "He's causing a disturbance," she insisted, her voice cracking, but the lie was flimsy, exposed by the cabin's silence. Emily, the younger attendant with dark hair and a ponytail, shifted uncomfortably behind her, her eyes darting to the floor. The businessman, 2 rows back, still recording, angled his phone to capture Sarah's faltering expression. The woman with the laptop typed furiously, her screen flashing with tweets under O'Hare incident, now trending with thousands of views. Sarah sensed the shift, her authority evaporating. "It's about policy," she stammered, gesturing vaguely at Jonathan's crucifix. "His display is divisive, especially given his background." The word background landed like a stone, a veiled jab at his Lebanese heritage, and the cabin stirred. The man with the champagne glass who'd spoken earlier shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." A woman 3 rows back whispered loudly, "She's got no ground to stand on." Jonathan remained still, his hands resting on his faded jeans, but his eyes met Sarah's not with anger, but with a sorrowful clarity that pierced her defenses. Carter's brow furrowed his veteran instincts, catching the undercurrent of bias. Divisive how he asked, his voice low, but pointed. Sarah opened her mouth, but no answer came. Her prejudice cloaked in protocol was unraveling before the cabin's eyes. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice soft but resonant. "Captain, this crucifix isn't about division," he said, touching the worn silver lightly. "It's about survival. It held me through nights I thought I'd never see mourning loss. Rejection moments when people judged me for my faith, my Lebanese blood. I don't wear it to provoke. I wear it to remember who I am." The words filled the cabin like a prayer, and passengers nodded, some wiping tears, others clasping their hands. Sarah's face flushed, her tablet slipping slightly in her hands. "I was protecting the cabin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the excuse sounded hollow even to her. Emily stepped forward, her voice hesitant but firm. "Sarah, he hasn't done anything wrong," she said, her dark ponytail swaying. "Maybe we should let this go." Sarah shot her a glare, but the betrayal stung. The businessman's phone was now openly recording, and the woman with the laptop posted a tweet: "Flight attendant targets the chosen star for his crucifix. Captain steps in. Chapter Justice for Jonathan." The hashtag surged, joined by clips of the confrontation spreading across social media. Carter exhaled, his gaze settling on Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell, I see no safety issue here," he said, his tone final. "This airline respects passengers' right to express their faith, especially when it's done with respect. Return to your duties." Sarah's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with a mix of shame and defiance. She turned to retreat, but Jonathan's voice stopped her. "Sarah," he said, his tone gentle but piercing, "I don't want you to walk away thinking this is about winning or losing. It's about seeing each other not as threats, but as people." The cabin fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Sarah paused, her back rigid, but she didn't turn around, her pride holding her hostage. Carter nodded at Jonathan, a flicker of respect in his eyes, then returned to the cockpit. The cabin buzzed with whispers, passengers exchanging glances of awe and support. The man with the champagne glass raised his glass subtly, as if toasting Jonathan's courage. The woman with the laptop typed her post, now viewed by thousands. "Jonathan Roumie just schooled a biased flight attendant with grace. Faith over fear." Sarah retreated to the galley, her hands trembling as she hid behind the curtain. She checked her phone, her heart sinking at the notifications. Clips of her confrontation were viral, with comments calling out her prejudice. "Who's this flight attendant shaming a man for his cross?" one tweet read. "She needs to be fired." Her chest tightened, not just with fear, but with a dawning realization she'd been wrong. In the cabin, Jonathan sat quietly, his crucifix still visible, his expression serene but thoughtful. He wasn't gloating. He was praying, his lips moving silently. He'd faced moments like this before: auditions where his Lebanese heritage was a problem, sets where his faith was mocked. But each time his crucifix had been a reminder of grace over vengeance. Now that grace was shifting the cabin's heart, a woman across the aisle who'd been silent until now leaned over. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes wet. "My son wears a cross like that. You made me proud." Jonathan smiled, nodding gently, his humility deepening the moment. Sarah, behind the galley curtain, felt the weight of her actions. A memory surfaced, her grandmother's voice, soft and wise. "Kindness is what you choose when no one's watching." She'd hidden behind policy, professionalism, and fear, but now those shields were gone. She glanced at Emily, who stood nearby, her expression conflicted. "You think I'm wrong, don't you?" Sarah asked, her voice low. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "He's not hurting anyone," she said. "You made it about something it wasn't." The words stung, but they cracked open a truth Sarah couldn't ignore. She looked out at Jonathan's seat, the crucifix glinting under the lights, and felt a pang of shame, not for the viral video, but for what she'd become. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but resolute. "This is Captain Carter. Our airline is committed to respect, inclusion, and the freedom to express faith without fear. Thank you for your cooperation." The message was subtle but unmistakable, a rebuke to Sarah's actions. Passengers clapped softly, some turning to Jonathan with nods of solidarity. The businessman posted his video captioned, "The chosen star stands up to bias on flight. Must watch." The woman's hashtag, #ShotSure Justice for Jonathan, hit millions of views with some tweets identifying Sarah by name, her career now hanging by a thread. Sarah knew she had to face Jonathan. Her hands shook as she stepped out of the galley, the aisle stretching like a gauntlet before her. The cabin watch phones raised, but Jonathan's eyes met hers with no trace of judgment, only compassion. He stood ready for what came next, his crucifix a quiet testament to his faith. The moment was poised for a reckoning, not of vengeance, but of grace that would transform the cabin and set the stage for Sarah's final act, one that would either redeem her or seal her downfall. The first-class cabin of the flight from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport was a transformed space no longer defined by the sterile luxury of leather seats, but by the raw power of truth and grace. Jonathan Roumie stood in seat 2A, his silver crucifix gleaming against his black t-shirt, his calm presence a lighthouse amid the fading storm. Sarah Mitchell, the flight attendant, with blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, stood frozen in the aisle. Her navy uniform a hollow shield against the weight of her exposed prejudice. Her demand that Jonathan hide his crucifix, rooted in her bias against his Christian faith and Lebanese heritage, had crumbled under his unwavering testimony, supported by Captain Daniel Carter's rebuke and the passengers' rising support. As the cabin watch phones recording and social media erupted, Sarah faced a pivotal moment. Jonathan's final act of grace would not only seal their encounter, but deliver a resounding punishment to her malice, satisfying the call for justice while illuminating the power of forgiveness. Sarah's hands trembled, her tablet abandoned on a galley counter as she faced Jonathan. The cabin was silent, the hum of the engines a distant pulse. Passengers leaned forward, some with phones raised, others with eyes wet from the unfolding drama. The businessman's video, now viral with millions of views, captioned, "The chosen Starface's bias" on flight-fueled hashtags like Attendant, "Justice for Jonathan," and "Gosh of Faith over Fear." The woman with the laptop posted a clip of Captain Carter's intercom message, amplifying the airline's stance on respect. Sarah's name was now public, linked to tweets like "Flight Attendant Sarah Mitchell shames," "Passenger for Crucifix, fire her." Her career teetered on the edge, but the deeper wound was within shame, not just for the backlash, but for the truth Jonathan's words had forced her to see. Jonathan's eyes met hers, not with triumph, but with compassion, the same grace he'd shown throughout. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a sermon, "this isn't about shame. It's about choosing who you want to be." He touched his crucifix lightly, its worn edges glinting. "This cross reminds me to forgive, even when it's hard. I don't want you to carry this as a burden. Let it be a chance to start again." The words were a lifeline, and the cabin felt their power. Emily, the younger attendant with dark hair and a ponytail, wiped her eyes, moved by Jonathan's mercy. The man with the champagne glass nodded, his earlier indignation softened by the moment's grace. Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came. Her pride, her shield of protocol, was gone. A memory surged, her grandmother's voice. "Kindness is what you choose when no one's watching." She'd hidden behind rules, fear, and bias, judging Jonathan for his faith and Lebanese roots before he'd spoken a word. Now exposed before the cabin and the world, she felt raw, vulnerable, but strangely seen. She took a shaky step forward, then in a moment that stunned the cabin, sank to her knees, her navy uniform creasing against the carpet. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting the cabin, but I was protecting my own fear. I judged you for your cross, your heritage, your place here. I'm so sorry." Gas rippled through the cabin phones, capturing the unprecedented scene. Jonathan stepped forward, his sneakers soft on the carpet, and extended his hand. Sarah looked up, tears streaming, and took it. He helped her stand his grip, steady, his expression radiating forgiveness. "You faced it," he said gently. "That's more than most do." The cabin erupted in applause, not the polite claps of a show, but the raw affirmation of a sacred moment. The businessman lowered his phone, his face softened. The woman with the laptop tweeted, "Flight attendant kneels to apologize to Jonathan Roumie. Grace wins. Astronaut HareMiracle." The hashtags soared, joined by millions praising Jonathan's compassion. Sarah stood, her posture no longer rigid, her eyes red but lighter. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. Jonathan gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Sit if you want," he said. She hesitated, then sat, her navy uniform contrasting his casual t-shirt. "I used to believe in something," she said softly, "before rules fear, and this job took it away." Jonathan nodded, his crucifix catching the light. "That's not gone," he said. "It's waiting for you to choose it again." He unclasped his crucifix, holding it out. "Take this, not as a symbol, but as a reminder of courage, of grace." Sarah's hand shook as she accepted it, the worn silver warm in her palm. The cabin watched, some passengers weeping, others clasping hands as if in church. Emily stepped forward, her voice quiet. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," she said, her ponytail swaying. Captain Carter, monitoring from the cockpit, smiled faintly, sensing the resolution. But the world beyond the plane was unforgiving. As the flight neared landing, Sarah's phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications of her viral infamy. The airline's PR team was flooded with complaints, sponsors demanded action, and media outlets ran headlines. Flight attendant shames the chosen star for Crucifix faces backlash. Leaked audio from a passenger's video captured Sarah's biased remarks, sealing her fate. And upon landing, the airline acted swiftly. Sarah was suspended pending investigation, but the public's outrage was relentless. Within hours, she was fired, her termination announced in a statement. "Our airline stands for inclusion. Discrimination has no place here." Social media erupted with the pressure to fire Sarah Mitchell, trending alongside calls for boycotts until justice was served. Her name became a byword for bigotry. Her LinkedIn profile deleted, her applications to other airlines rejected. Industry insiders shunned her, and her once promising career was reduced to ashes. A final blow came when a former colleague leaked her past complaints about religious passengers and foreign types, cementing her disgrace. Sarah vanished from public view, her life upended by the prejudice she'd chosen to wield. Jonathan, meanwhile, returned to his quiet Chicago life, his humility unchanged. The viral incident brought new viewers to The Chosen, but he stayed focused on his calling, answering fan letters with care. One letter from a Lebanese-American teen touched him deeply. "You showed me I don't have to hide my faith or my roots. Thank you for being brave." Steve Harvey, moved by the story, invited Jonathan to his show, where they shared a tearful embrace celebrating faith's triumph. The airline, in a gesture of goodwill, donated to a charity Jonathan supported, honoring his grace. The video of the flight became a global phenomenon, viewed over 700 million times, not for its drama, but for its truth. Comments poured in from around the world, stories of people inspired to confront bias, embrace faith, or forgive. A pastor in Texas wrote, "Jonathan Roumie turned a flight into a sermon without saying a word." The hashtag #HareMiracle trended for weeks, a testament to grace over hate. Sarah, in a quiet apartment weeks later, recorded a video holding Jonathan's crucifix, now wearing a plain t-shirt. "I was wrong," she said, her voice steady. "I hid behind fear, but Jonathan showed me courage. I'm starting over, and I'll never hide again." The video garnered mixed reactions. Some praised her change. Others saw it as too late. But it marked her first step toward redemption. The encounter was a watershed, a reminder that truth spoken with love can shatter prejudice. Jonathan's crucifix, small and worn, became a symbol of resilience, while Sarah's downfall was a warning. Bias reaps its own destruction. For those watching, the message was clear: choose grace, not judgment, and let faith shine through fear. The story continues to ripple, a beacon for a world hungry for hope, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from vengeance, but from a quiet cross that refuses to be hidden.